"Oh, you don't need to bother Athena with questions about work, Margaret." My mother's voice cut through the warm, post-dinner hum, smooth as polished glass. "It's a rather complicated little hobby she has, with her computer." The words weren't shouted, but they landed like a physical blow, silencing the polite chatter around the Thanksgiving table. Margaret Gable, a longtime friend of my parents', froze with a kind, questioning smile still on her face. I felt a dozen pairs of eyes flicker towards me. A hot flush of shame crept up my neck, a familiar burn I had learned to endure. I offered a small, tight smile of my own and took a slow sip of water, the crystal glass cool against my lips, a stark contrast to the fire in my cheeks. This was the stage my mother, Eleanor, had built. A grand mahogany dining table, laden with the ghosts of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie, surrounded by the soft glow of candlelight. To our guests, we were the picture of success and familial bliss. But I knew the truth. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a carefully directed performance, and I had just been reminded of my role, the silent, disappointing prop. Across from me, my sister, Victoria, the star of the show, gracefully patted her lips with a linen napkin. She was radiant tonight, basking in the glow of a recent promotion. She was the sun around which our family's little universe orbited, and I was the distant, cold stone, caught in her gravity, but sharing none of her light. Finally, after the last slice of pie had been served, my mother clapped her hands together, a theatrical gesture that signaled the evening's main event. The room fell into an expectant hush. "Richard, my dear," she said, her voice rich with purpose, "I believe it's time." My father, Richard, beamed. He rose from his chair and went to his study, returning a moment later with a flat, dark blue velvet box. A knot of something unfamiliar and dangerous tightened in my stomach. It looked old, important. My mother accepted it from him, her hands caressing the worn velvet. "Family," she began, her eyes sweeping over the guests before landing, inevitably, on Victoria, "is about legacy. It's about honoring the traditions of those who came before us." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. My gaze was fixed on that box. A forgotten memory surfaced, me as a little girl, sneaking into my grandmother's bedroom, carefully opening a similar box to peek at the treasure inside. "My mother," Eleanor continued, her voice softening with practiced emotion, "was a woman of incredible grace. She left this for the daughter who would one day carry on her legacy, the one who would truly make this family proud." My heart began a frantic, stupid rhythm against my ribs. Hope. It was a foolish, treacherous poison. But I had loved my grandmother fiercely. She was the only one who had ever truly seen me, the one who bought me my first art supplies and told me I had magic in my fingers. In the lonely landscape of my childhood, she was my only ally. Surely she would have wanted. Eleanor's eyes met mine for a fleeting second. There was no warmth, no affection, only a cold, final calculation. She then turned her brilliant smile back to her favored child as she opened the box. Resting on faded ivory satin was the necklace, a delicate platinum chain from which a spray of brilliant cut diamonds cascaded, like a frozen waterfall of light. A collective gasp went through the room. I couldn't breathe. It felt as if all the air had been stolen from the room, leaving only the cloying scent of my mother's perfume. Eleanor lifted the necklace from the box. The diamonds caught the candlelight and threw 1,000 tiny rainbows across the ceiling. She walked around the table to stand behind Victoria, who tilted her head in anticipation. "An heirloom like this," my mother announced to the captivated audience, "is for the daughter who has honored our name." Congratulations on your new position, my darling Victoria. You are everything we ever hoped for." With practiced grace, she fastened the clasp. The diamonds settled against my sister's collarbone as if they were made for her. Victoria lifted a hand to touch them, her fingers tracing the cool stones. She looked up, and her eyes found mine across the table. In them was not malice, not even pity. It was something far worse, triumphant, effortless superiority. My father began to applaud, a loud, sharp sound in the sudden silence. The guests, jolted from their trance, quickly joined in. The room filled with the sound of their approval, a wave of noise that crashed over me, pushing me down, down, down into the depths of my chair. I sat there, my hands clenched into fists in my lap, my face a mask of polite neutrality I had perfected over 28 years. They hadn't just given my sister a piece of jewelry. They had taken my grandmother from me, rewriting history to erase my name from her legacy. In the warmth of that perfectly lit dining room, I had never felt so cold, so utterly and completely invisible. The drive home was a blur of streetlights, streaking across my windshield like tears. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in the car was a relief, a sterile quiet that began to wash away the cloying sound of forced laughter and polite applause. My hands were clenched on the steering wheel, my knuckles white, the only outward sign of the storm raging inside me. In my mind's eye, I could still see the diamonds of my grandmother's necklace, cold and brilliant against Victoria's skin. A legacy, my mother had called it. A prize for the winning daughter. It wasn't just the necklace. It was never just one thing. It was the weight of 1,000 similar moments, a lifetime of being weighed, measured, and found wanting. The car hummed along the empty freeway, and the past came flooding back, each memory a distinct exhibit in the long, quiet trial of my life. I'm 18 years old again, standing in the driveway on a bright, sunny morning. A gleaming red convertible is parked by the curb, a giant bow on its hood. Victoria is squealing with delight, hugging our parents. It's our shared birthday. My gift is waiting on the patio table. It's a book, wrapped in plain paper. I open it. The title stares up at me in bold, cheerful letters. Finding Your Purpose. My mother places a hand on my shoulder, her touch light and devoid of warmth. "I hope this helps you find your direction, dear," she says, her voice full of a pity that stings more than any insult. A red car sped past me on the left, and the memory receded, leaving its familiar ache behind. Direction. They thought I had none, simply because my path wasn't as loud or as shiny as Victoria's. 4 years later. I'm standing in a cap and gown in our crowded living room, holding my diploma. I graduated valedictorian of my design program, the scroll of paper in my hand a testament to 4 years of sleepless nights and relentless work. My father is holding court with some of his business associates. I hear one of them ask about me. My father waves a dismissive hand in my direction. "Oh, the little one just likes her artsy things," he says with a chuckle. "An expensive hobby, but it keeps her busy." I had brought my portfolio, a heavy case filled with the best work I had ever done, hoping he might finally look at it. He never did. It sat by the door, unopened, a silent monument to his indifference. I signaled and took the exit ramp toward my apartment. The city lights were muted here, the buildings smaller and older. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Every square foot of it paid for by my expensive hobby. The quiet of the car was suddenly filled with the ghost of a wheezing cough, a rattling in my chest that I could almost feel again. I'm 25, curled up in my old bed, shivering with a fever that won't break. The doctor said it was a bad case of pneumonia, that I needed rest and care. I called my mother, my voice weak and raspy, asking if she could possibly bring over some soup. "Oh, darling, I wish I could," she'd said, her voice distracted. "But Victoria is leaving for that big conference in Milan tomorrow, and I absolutely must help her pack. You know how she gets. You'll be fine, just drink plenty of fluids." I hung up the phone and cried, not from the physical pain, but from the chilling realization of my own expendability. I spent the next week alone, dragging myself to the kitchen for water and crackers, each breath a struggle. I learned then, in the feverish haze, that I had no safety net. I was entirely on my own. I pulled into my designated parking spot and cut the engine. The silence that rushed in was different now. It was no longer empty. It was filled with the ghosts of every self-help book, every dismissive comment, every unanswered call for help. The pain was no longer a fresh wound, but the very marrow in my bones. My family thought my silence was a sign of weakness, of failure. They were wrong. My silence was a fortress. And inside its walls, brick by painful brick, I had been building my own legacy. One they knew nothing about, one they could never take away. I turned the key, and the lock gave a familiar, satisfying click. The moment I closed the door to my apartment, the weight of my family's world slid off my shoulders. The hallway of my building was drab and smelled faintly of old carpets, and from the outside, my door was just one of many, identical and unassuming. This was the image my family held of my life, small, plain, forgettable. But inside it was different. Inside was my kingdom. I flicked on a single lamp, casting a warm glow over the room. To a casual visitor, it was just a small, one-bedroom apartment, but the entire living space was dominated by what my mother would call my little hobby. It was a command center, a digital forge I had built piece by piece. A massive curved monitor took up most of the desk, flanked by two others angled towards the center. In front of them lay a professional Wacom tablet, its surface smooth and dark, the size of a small tabletop. The heart of the operation, a custom-built computer tower, sat on the floor, its internal lights pulsing with quiet power, a silent, sleeping beast. This was where I had poured every dollar not spent on rent or ramen. This was where I had invested every hour not spent enduring their pity. I dropped my keys in a small ceramic bowl by the door and walked over to the desk, my body sinking into the worn ergonomic chair. I woke the computer from its sleep, and the screens flickered to life, illuminating my face in their cool blue light. A single unread email sat in my inbox. The sender's name made a small, genuine smile touch my lips for the first time all night. I opened the email, read the brief, complimentary note from my client, and then opened the attached project file. On the main screen, a building materialized from the digital ether. It was a skyscraper, but not just any skyscraper. It was a twisting, crystalline tower that seemed to defy gravity, its glass facade designed to capture and fracture the sunlight into 1,000 different colors. It was more than a building. It was a dream rendered in polygons and light. My mind drifted from the screen back to the beginning, back to the countless nights I'd spent here. My only company, the hum of the processor and the glow of YouTube tutorials, teaching me the impossibly complex software that was now an extension of my own hands. I remembered the 18-hour days, fueled by cheap instant coffee, hunched over this very desk until my back ached and my eyes burned, meticulously tweaking the reflection on a single pane of glass or the texture of a marble floor. Every piece of equipment in this room had a story of sacrifice. The main monitor had cost me an entire year of saying no. No to dinners with the few friends who still bothered to ask. No to new clothes. No to vacations. The rendering software licenses were more than my car. I built my studio, Elysian Renders, from nothing, working anonymously on small freelance jobs, until my reputation for perfection began to spread through word of mouth in the exclusive world of high-end real estate development. A low growl from my stomach reminded me I'd barely touched my Thanksgiving dinner. I got up, went to the tiny kitchen, and put a kettle on the stove. A few minutes later, I was back at my desk, a simple bowl of instant noodles steaming beside my keyboard. I picked up my stylus, my eyes fixed on the magnificent tower on the screen. There I sat, in my small apartment, eating a meal that cost less than $1, while with a flick of my wrist, I manipulated the light and shadows on a virtual building worth hundreds of millions. My family thought I was failing because my life didn't look like theirs. They didn't understand. I wasn't trying to join their world of shiny surfaces and hollow praise. I was building my own, and it was nearly complete. The next morning, a calendar notification clicked on my phone, pulling me from the hypnotic process of refining the textures on the tower's lobby floor. The alert read, "Video call, Mr. Sterling." A jolt of nervous energy shot through me. A familiar mix of anxiety and excitement. This was the final review for the Sterling Tower project, the culmination of 6 months of my life's most intensive work. I quickly tidied the corner of the room that would be visible on camera, ran a brush through my hair, and put on a simple, professional black blouse. At precisely 9 a.m., the call came through. I took a deep breath and clicked accept. The face that appeared on my screen was not that of a ruthless corporate tycoon. Mr. Sterling was in his early 70s, with a full head of silver hair, kind eyes crinkled at the corners, and a smile that seemed genuine. He was in a richly paneled office, a window behind him showing a panoramic view of a city skyline, but his focus was entirely on me. "Athena," he began, his voice warm and resonant, like aged whiskey. "I apologize for the early call. I was looking over the final renders you sent last night, and I confess, I couldn't wait to speak with you." "Good morning, Mr. Sterling. It's no problem at all," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I hope they were to your satisfaction." He let out a soft chuckle. "Satisfaction? My dear, that is a woefully inadequate word." He leaned closer to his camera, his expression turning serious, almost reverent. "I've been developing properties for 50 years. I've worked with the best architects, the most famous designers in the world. But what you do, it's something else entirely." He gestured to a large screen I could just see over his shoulder, where my image of his tower was displayed, glowing against a hyper-realistic sunset. "You don't just create an image of a building, Athena. You create a feeling. The way the light catches the western facade, the sense of scale from the plaza view. You are not simply an artist. You are a poet of space. Your vision has transformed my project from bricks and mortar and into a dream." The words struck me with the force of a physical impact. I felt a stinging sensation behind my eyes, and I had to swallow hard against the lump forming in my throat. All my life, I had been the girl with the artsy hobby. My work had been dismissed, trivialized, ignored, and now this man, a titan of his industry, was calling me a poet. "Thank you, Mr. Sterling," I managed to say, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't hide. "That means more to me than you can imagine. I mean every word, he said earnestly. Which brings me to my second point. I've had my board draw up a contract. I want to retain Elysian Renders exclusively for Sterling Holdings. A 5-year term. I want your poetry for all of our future projects. He named a figure that made the air leave my lungs in a silent rush. It was more money than I had ever imagined earning in a lifetime. I sat there, stunned into silence. He took my silence not as hesitation, but as the shock it was. "We need you, Athena," he continued, a new intensity in his voice. "In fact, we're in the final stages of hiring a new marketing director to spearhead the launch of this very tower. It's a massive undertaking, and I told my executive team just yesterday, we cannot place the soul of this project into the hands of someone who is not worthy of the standards set by Elysian Renders. The quality you've delivered is the benchmark. Everything and everyone else will be measured against it." His words hung in the air between us. He was simply stating a business requirement, but for me, it was a revelation. A key, turning a lock in a door I didn't even know existed. The call ended a few minutes later with promises to have the contract sent over by the end of the day. I stared at the blank screen for a long time after he was gone. The praise, the life-changing contract, it was all overwhelming. But it was his last comment that echoed in my mind, worthy of the standard set by Elysian Renders. For the first time, I felt the ground truly solid beneath my feet. His words were a balm, soothing the raw, stinging wounds of a lifetime of being told I wasn't enough. My family had spent years chipping away at my value. In one 10-minute phone call, this kind, wise man had not only restored it, he had encased it in steel. 2 days later, still buoyed by the life-altering call with Mr. Sterling, I was working at my desk when my phone buzzed. The caller ID flashed Mom. My brief sense of peace evaporated, replaced by the familiar clenching in my gut. I let it ring twice before answering, bracing myself. "Athena, darling, you will not believe the news." Her voice was effervescent, a tone she reserved for major family announcements, which always meant news about Victoria. "Hi, Mom, what's going on?" I kept my voice neutral, clicking to save the file I was working on. "It's just the most wonderful, wonderful thing," she gushed. "Victoria got it. The dream job she was interviewing for. She just called me, screaming with excitement." "That's great," I said, a little too quickly. What's the job?" "Director of Marketing at one of the most prestigious real estate firms in the country. A company called Sterling Holdings. Have you heard of them? Of course you haven't. They're very exclusive." The name hit me like a physical shock. Sterling Holdings. For a moment, I couldn't process it. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the pieces of my separate lives, the hidden, successful one, and the one my family saw, colliding with impossible force. I must have been silent for too long, because my mother's voice sharpened slightly. "Athena, are you there?" "Yes, sorry, I'm here," I said, my voice sounding distant even to my own ears. "Wow, that's a big deal." "It's more than a big deal. It's a 6-figure salary, darling, not including the bonuses, the prestige, the projects she'll be working on. They're building some iconic new tower downtown. This is the kind of position that sets you up for life. We are just so proud." I could hear the unspoken comparison hanging in the air between us. This is what a successful daughter looks like. I stayed quiet, letting her enjoy her moment. "Anyway," she continued, her voice shifting into a more confidential, conspiratorial tone. "We were just on the phone, planning a little celebration dinner for her, and she said the funniest thing." I knew this tone. This was the velvet glove she used to deliver the hardest blows. She was talking about her new colleagues, the kind of powerful people she'll be working with now, and she said, "Mom, I just hope Athena doesn't feel too out of place at the party. It would be so embarrassing if my new boss from Sterling asked what my little sister does for a living." She let out a small, tinkling laugh. "She worries about you, you see. She has such a good heart. She just doesn't want you to feel uncomfortable." A profound, icy calm washed over me. The shock was gone, replaced by a terrible clarity. It wasn't funny, it wasn't a joke. It was the purest distillation of how they saw me. A liability, an embarrassment to be managed. And Victoria's good heart was just a convenient fiction my mother used to disguise their shared cruelty. My sister wasn't worried about my comfort. She was worried about her own image, and I was a potential stain on it. "I see," I said, my voice flat and cold. "Well, you can tell her not to worry. I'm sure I'll be busy." "Oh, good dear, that's probably for the best," my mother said, completely missing the ice in my tone. Or more likely, choosing to ignore it. "I have to run. Talk soon." The line went dead. I placed the phone back on the desk, my hand perfectly steady. I looked at the magnificent crystalline tower glowing on my screen. The Sterling Tower, Victoria's new project, my project. A slow, dangerous smile touched my lips. "Oh, Victoria," I whispered to the empty room, "you have no idea." For a week, I lived and breathed my work, fueled by a newfound sense of purpose. Mr. Sterling's validation was a shield, and for the first time, the thought of my family felt distant, their criticisms like faint echoes from another world. I was immersed in the final lighting adjustments for the Sterling Tower's atrium, a cathedral of glass and steel, when my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. I glanced at it, expecting an email notification. Instead, it was a text message from my bank. "Fraud alert. Did you just authorize a charge of $3,450.78 at Chloe? Reply Y or N." I stared at the screen, my brow furrowed in confusion. Chloe, the designer boutique? I had never set foot in one of their stores in my life. My usual wardrobe consisted of jeans and sweaters bought online. I immediately typed N and hit send. A moment later, another text arrived, instructing me to call the fraud department. A cold knot of dread began to form in my stomach. This was a nightmare. Having to cancel cards, dispute charges, prove that someone, somewhere, had stolen my information. I logged into my online banking portal, my heart starting to beat a little faster. And there it was, a pending charge for $3,450.78. The merchant name mocked me from the screen. My mind raced. Had my card been skimmed at a gas station? Had my data been breached? I was meticulous about my online security. This didn't make sense. And then a memory surfaced, unbidden and sharp. Victoria, 2 days ago, showing up at my door unannounced. "Just in the neighborhood," she'd chirped, breezing past me into the apartment. "Can you believe we're going to be colleagues, sort of? I have to celebrate and wanted to see my little sister." She had chattered on about her new role, about the impressive office, about a new boyfriend she was trying to keep secret from our parents. It had all seemed so strangely friendly. An olive branch, I had foolishly thought. I had made her tea, and we sat on my small couch. She had been complaining about a pair of shoes she wanted to buy online, but was having trouble with the website. "Here, let me see," I had offered, taking her phone. "Oh, you know what?" she had said. "My Wi-Fi is so spotty. Can I just use your laptop for a second to order them? My card is already saved on my account." I hadn't thought twice about it. I'd handed her my laptop. She'd spent 5 minutes clicking away before sighing in frustration. Ugh, it's not working here either. Never mind. She had handed it back and left soon after, all smiles and promises to have me over for dinner soon. It couldn't be. The thought was so ugly, so monstrous, that my mind instinctively recoiled from it. But the suspicion was a splinter, working its way deeper. I remembered something else. The small, unassuming security camera I had installed in the hallway outside my door a year ago after a package went missing. It fed a live stream to a secure cloud server. My fingers felt like ice as I typed in the password and navigated to the archive from 2 days ago. I fast-forwarded the footage to the time of Victoria's visit. There she was, arriving with her bright, false smile. I watched her leave 20 minutes later, but she didn't just leave. She paused in the hallway, just out of sight of my peephole. She pulled out her phone, her back to the camera. Her movements were quick, furtive. She tapped on her screen, glanced back at my door, and then hurried down the hall. She hadn't been trying to buy shoes on my laptop. She had been confirming something she had been planning. The memory of how she got my card number hit me then. About 6 months ago, I was trying to order a specific piece of software that was only available from a European website, and my bank kept flagging the transaction. Victoria, ever the sophisticated one, had offered to do it for me. "I'll just put it on my card, and you can pay me back, sweetie. It's easier." But her card had been declined. "Oh, how embarrassing," she'd laughed. "Must be a fraud alert. Here, just let me try yours." I had foolishly, trustingly read my number, expiration date, and security code aloud to her. She had gotten the purchase to go through. She had helped me. The pieces clicked into place with sickening finality. This wasn't a random hacker. This was my sister. My sister, who had just landed a 6-figure job, had used my credit card to buy a luxury handbag. The thought that went through her mind was so clear, it was as if she had whispered it in my ear. She'll never notice. She never buys anything nice anyway. The hot sting of betrayal I expected never came. Instead, a profound and terrifying cold spread through my veins, extinguishing every last ember of hope, of love, of familial duty. The pain I had carried for years didn't just fade. It crystallized into something hard and sharp. It was the calm of a deep, frozen lake, the absolute certainty that something was irrevocably broken. She hadn't just stolen my money. She had taken my trust, my privacy, and the last shred of my identity as her sister, and used it all to solve a trivial, self-inflicted problem. To her, I wasn't a person. I was a resource, an unattended bank account, a convenience. I closed the laptop. My hands were perfectly steady. My breath was even. The quiet grief I had lived with my whole life was gone. In its place was a silence that was vast and clear and absolute. Enough. This has to end. I let the cold certainty settle in my bones for a full minute, allowing it to solidify into a foundation of pure, unshakable resolve. Then I picked up my phone. My fingers didn't tremble as I navigated to my contacts and pressed the call button next to Victoria's name. I put the phone on speaker, placing it on the desk in front of me, and leaned back in my chair, my eyes fixed on the city skyline outside my window. It rang 3 times before she answered, her voice a little breathless and annoyed. "What's up, Ath? I'm in the middle of something." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. "I have a question for you, Victoria. It's about a charge on my credit card from 2 days ago. $3,450 from a Chloe boutique." There was a beat of silence on the other end of the line. "What are you talking about?" she said, her voice a pitch higher than usual. "How would I know anything about that? Someone must have stolen your number." The denial was quick, but brittle. I let the silence stretch, a cold, empty space I knew would unnerve her. "That's what I thought at first," I said, my voice level and calm, betraying none of the glacial fury inside me. "But then I remembered something. I remembered you having my card information from that software I bought last year, and I have security footage of you stopping in the hallway to use your phone right after you left my apartment 2 days ago. So I'll ask you again, did you use my card?" The line went quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. The flustered denial was gone, replaced by a heavy, indignant pause. When she finally spoke, her voice was dripping with the familiar, dismissive contempt I had known my entire life. "Oh, for God's sake, Athena, are you serious?" she scoffed. "Don't be so dramatic. It was a stupid emergency. I'll pay you back when I get my first paycheck. What's the big deal?" The calm in my veins deepened, turning to ice. "It's just a few $1,000s, she continued, her voice rising with arrogance. "You act like you're so rich all of a sudden. You barely leave that dingy apartment. What do you even spend your money on?" That was it. That was the final ugly truth laid bare. To her, my work, my savings, my entire life was so insignificant that it was hers for the taking. The last thread of connection to the sister I once thought I had snapped. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, even tone that was colder than any shout. "Sunday night, 7 o'clock, at Mom and Dad's house." She was clearly taken aback by the sudden shift. "What? What are you talking about? I'm busy Sunday." "Be there," I said. It was not a request. "We're going to have a family conversation about my finances, your new job, everything. Make sure you're there." Before she could form a protest, before she could unleash another insult, I ended the call. The click of the button was the loudest sound in the silent room. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on the past. The war had just begun. I arrived at 7 o'clock sharp. The house I grew up in had always felt more like a museum than a home, and tonight was no exception. The lights were low, the cushions on the sofas were perfectly plumped, and the air was still and silent. It was a stage, meticulously set for a play about a happy, successful family. They were all waiting in the living room, a silent tribunal. Victoria was lounging on the armchair, scrolling through her phone as if this were a minor inconvenience. My mother, Eleanor, was perched on the edge of the sofa, her posture rigid with disapproval. My father, Richard, stood by the fireplace, avoiding my eyes, his default position in any family conflict. The air was thick with their unspoken alliance. "Athena," my mother began, breaking the silence. Her voice was clipped, annoyed. "This cryptic summons. What on earth could be so important that you had to disrupt our entire Sunday evening?" I didn't answer her immediately. I walked over to the large oak coffee table, the centerpiece of their carefully curated room, and placed my phone down. I then took a single folded piece of paper from my purse and placed it beside the phone. I hadn't come for a fight. I had come for a reckoning. "I'm not here to cause a scene," I said, my voice calm and even. The sound of it, so devoid of the usual hurt or hesitation, seemed to surprise them. "I'm here for a clarification." I gestured to the paper. "This is a copy of my most recent credit card statement. As you can see, there is a charge for $3,450 from the Chloe boutique, made 3 days ago." Victoria let out an exaggerated, impatient sigh. She didn't even look up from her phone. "Is that what this is about? My God, Athena, I told you I'd pay you back. You're acting like it's the end of the world." Before I could respond, my mother jumped in, her voice a shield for her favorite daughter. A misunderstanding, I'm sure, she said, waving a dismissive hand. Victoria would never do something like that intentionally. You two are sisters. You should be helping each other out, not accusing each other like this. She turned her sharp gaze on me. Honestly, Athena, to make such a fuss over a little bit of money, it's terribly unbecoming. What must you think of us? What would other people think if they heard about this? There it was, the question that ruled their entire existence. What will people think? My father finally spoke, his voice placating, weak. Now, let's not blow this out of proportion, he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. It's a family matter. Victoria just landed a huge new job, a very important position. The last thing she needs is this kind of stress. Let's not rock the boat, Athena. We need to be supportive of her future. I looked from one face to the next. I watched them, a perfect tag team of denial and deflection. They weren't listening to me. They didn't see a crime, a violation of trust. All they saw was their perfect daughter being inconvenienced by her problematic, overly dramatic little sister. The familiar ache of wanting their approval, of wishing they would just once take my side, was gone. It had been replaced by a cold, hollow clarity. I wasn't looking at a family. I was looking at a business, and Victoria was their star asset. My role was to be quiet, to not cause trouble, to not tarnish the brand. I let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, allowing the weight of their combined dismissal to settle in the room. I saw the relief in their eyes. They thought they had won. They thought I would do what I always did: absorb the injustice, swallow my pain, and retreat back into my silent world. All right, I said, my voice quiet. I picked up my phone and the statement from the table. I understand your position. Good, my mother said, a note of triumph in her voice. I'm glad that's settled. Now let's not speak of this unpleasantness ever again. I looked at her, at my father's averted gaze, at Victoria's smug little smile, as she finally pocketed her phone. They had no idea. They thought they were closing a conversation. They had just provided the opening statement for a trial, and I was about to reveal my evidence. As I stood there, absorbing their united front, my mother Eleanor gave a satisfied little nod, as if she had just successfully managed a minor corporate crisis. She smoothed her dress, her composure fully restored. Well, she said, her voice dripping with condescending magnanimity, I'm glad we've all decided to be adults about this. Family is about forgiveness, after all. It's our duty to be tolerant of each other's little mistakes. That is the legacy we have built, a legacy of legacy. The word, spoken by me, cut through her lecture like a shard of glass. It was quiet, yet it silenced the room instantly. It was a voice they had never heard from me before, flat, cold, and utterly devoid of warmth. My mother stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. You want to talk about legacy, Mom? I continued, taking a deliberate step toward the center of the room. Let's do that. Let's talk about Victoria's new job, Sterling Holdings, a very prestigious company. Victoria shifted in her armchair, a flicker of confusion crossing her smug face. My father looked uneasy. They've hired her to be the marketing director for their new flagship project, the Sterling Tower, I went on, my gaze locking onto my sister's. An iconic building, a project that demands absolute perfection, the highest standard of excellence. And the person responsible for the entire visual identity, the very soul of that project, is me. A stunned silence filled the room. It was so profound I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. I calmly walked over to my bag, took out my sleek, lightweight laptop, and placed it on the coffee table. With deliberate, unhurried movements, I opened it, plugged a small HDMI cable into its side, and connected the other end to the port on their large wall-mounted television. I pressed a single key. The TV screen, which a moment before had been dark, flickered to life, and then it was filled with a vision. An image of the Sterling Tower at sunset blazed across the screen, so photorealistic, so breathtakingly beautiful, that it looked like a window into another world. The light fractured through its crystalline facade, casting a golden glow on the city below. I clicked a key, and the view swooped down to a grand plaza, then seamlessly through the glass doors into a soaring, majestic lobby where light and shadow danced on polished marble floors. The room was utterly still. This wasn't the doodling on a computer they had imagined. This was architecture as poetry. This was a world they didn't know existed, created by a daughter they had never bothered to see. I turned back to face them, my expression unreadable. "My company is called Elysian Renders," I stated, my voice echoing slightly in the silent room. "My primary client for the last 6 months has been Mr. Sterling himself. He told me, just last week, that he cannot and will not accept a marketing director who has issues with integrity, even minor ones. He said, and I quote, 'The person who markets this building must be worthy of the standards set by the person who gave it its soul.'" I looked directly at Victoria. The color had drained from her face, leaving a pale, sickly mask. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. My mother's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. My father looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. I delivered the final blow, my voice dropping to a near whisper, making it all the more devastating. "One phone call, Victoria, a single phone call from me to Mr. Sterling, explaining that his new choice for marketing director has a habit of committing credit card fraud. That's all it would take. And that dream opportunity of yours, that 6-figure salary, that entire future you're so proud of, it would all turn to dust." The shock in the room was palpable, a living, breathing thing. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had been annihilated in a nuclear flash. I stood up, feeling a lightness I hadn't felt in 28 years. I looked at their stunned, horrified faces, and for the first time I felt nothing but a quiet, clean pity. "You always talked about legacy," I said, my voice clear and steady. "About the pride of the family. I used to think that if I became successful, I could finally be a part of that, but I was wrong. The legacy you built is a hollow shell. It's a stage where truth is sacrificed for appearances, and character is less important than reputation. I don't want any part of that legacy." I took a final look at them, 3 strangers in a beautifully decorated room. "From tonight on, I'm building my own. It will be built on truth, on hard work, and on self-respect. And it will be something you can never, ever touch." And with that, I turned around, walked out of the living room, and closed the front door quietly behind me, leaving them shattered in the ruins of their silent, broken world. In the weeks that followed, an unfamiliar quiet settled over my life. The angry, buzzing hornet's nest of my family's expectations and disappointments was gone. There were no pleading calls, no furious texts, no attempts at all to contact me. The silence was absolute. It was the sound of a bridge, not just burned, but utterly erased from the map. I didn't make the call to Mr. Sterling. In the end, I didn't have to. The choice I had given Victoria, to live with the truth or to try and outrun it, was a far more fitting judgment than any I could have delivered. I simply went back to my work, signing the lucrative contract with Sterling Holdings, and throwing myself into the final phase of the tower project. The rest, I learned later, was a masterclass in self-destruction. It was my father who finally broke the silence, about a month after that Sunday night. His voice on the phone was thin and tired, stripped of its usual bluster. He sounded like an old man. He told me, in a rambling, disjointed way, what had happened. Victoria, in a blind panic after I left, had apparently decided on a preemptive strike. She believed she could spin the narrative, get ahead of my threats. She secured a meeting with Mr. Sterling under the pretense of discussing her marketing strategy. There, she performed the role of her life, the concerned professional woman, forced to deal with a troubled, unstable, younger sister. She confessed, with what my father described as great reluctance, that there had been a small family financial misunderstanding, and that I was attempting to use my position with his company to blackmail her. She was hoping for an ally, a sympathetic patriarch who would understand the unfortunate messiness of family. She misjudged her audience completely. Mr. Sterling, as my father recounted, with a hollow voice, had listened to her entire, carefully rehearsed speech without interruption. When she was finished, he hadn't raised his voice. He had simply looked at her with a profound and unwavering disappointment. He told her that integrity wasn't a small thing at his company, it was the bedrock. He said that her willingness to not only defraud her own sister, but to then attempt to manipulate him by assassinating her character, showed a fundamental flaw that no amount of PR savvy could disguise. The job offer was not only rescinded, but he also made it clear that her name would be remembered at Sterling Holdings for all the wrong reasons. The fallout was swift and brutal. The world Victoria and my parents had built was a small, insular one, held together by reputation and gossip. News in that world travels faster than light. It wasn't just a lost job, it was a public humiliation. Victoria's name was tarnished. The dream opportunity had become a cautionary tale whispered over cocktails at the country club. For my parents, the punishment was perhaps even worse. Their prize-winning daughter was now a source of shame. Their perfect family legacy was a ruin. The friends they had cultivated for decades suddenly became distant. The dinner party invitations stopped coming. My mother's life, a carefully constructed calendar of social engagements and charitable luncheons, was suddenly empty. They were forced to live with the one thing they had spent their lives trying to avoid, the judgment of their peers. They had been exposed, their perfect family portrait revealed as a cheap forgery, and they had no one to blame but themselves. As my father finished his quiet, defeated story, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel a vindictive thrill. I felt a strange and profound sense of peace. Justice hadn't been an act of revenge. It had simply been the natural, inevitable consequence of truth. They had built their house on a foundation of lies, and a single quiet gust of honesty had been enough to bring it all crashing down. 6 months later, I stood by a wall of floor-to-ceiling glass, watching the city lights begin to twinkle to life as dusk settled. The view was from the 30th floor, an uninterrupted panorama of the sprawling metropolis I now called my own. This wasn't the small, cramped apartment I had once hidden in. This was a penthouse, spacious and filled with light, the air smelling of fresh paint and new beginnings. It was the first project I had designed entirely for myself. The small command center of my old life was gone, replaced by a bright, airy studio in a dedicated wing of the apartment, its technology even more advanced. The rest of the space was minimalist and warm, a sanctuary I had built with the profits of my own 2 hands. It was the physical manifestation of the contract Mr. Sterling had honored, a tangible result of the freedom I had seized. My anonymity was gone too. A few months ago, with Mr. Sterling's encouragement, Elysian Renders by Athena was officially launched. My name, once a source of quiet shame in my family, was now a brand associated with the highest level of architectural artistry. The work was pouring in, but I was no longer driven by a desperate need to prove myself. I was driven by passion. Mr. Sterling had become more than a client. He was a mentor, a friend. We had lunch once a week, and he would share stories of his 50 years in business, of his triumphs and his mistakes. He never spoke of my family, and I never brought them up. He simply treated me with a quiet, paternal respect that healed wounds I never knew I still had. He had become my chosen family, a single sturdy pillar of support that was worth more than 100 hollow relations. But the most important change wasn't the apartment, or the money, or even the public recognition. I walked over to my new desk, its surface clean and uncluttered, and picked up a heavy cream-colored envelope. I ran my thumb over the elegant embossed seal. It was the first official letterhead for a project that had become the true heart of my new life. Last month, I had finalized the creation of a nonprofit foundation. I used a significant portion of my new income to establish a scholarship fund, one that would provide financial aid and state-of-the-art equipment to gifted young digital design students from low-income backgrounds, kids who had the talent but not the means, kids who were told their passion was just an expensive hobby. I named it the Eleanor Grant, after my grandmother. Not my mother, but her mother, the woman who had first put a pencil in my hand and told me I had magic in my fingers. I was reclaiming her legacy, taking back her name from the memory of that diamond necklace and attaching it to something that would truly last: opportunity. A chance for other quiet, overlooked artists to build their own kingdoms just as I had. Standing there, in the quiet of my beautiful new home, I felt a sense of peace that was so profound it felt like a part of my very soul. The anger was gone, the hurt had faded into a distant, silvery scar. I had won, but not in the way I once thought I needed to. Victory wasn't about watching them lose. It was about building a life so full and meaningful that their world and their judgment no longer had the power to touch me. A week ago, the mailman delivered a single unexpected letter. It was a simple, inexpensive, cream-colored envelope, and the address was written in a hand I recognized instantly, though it was less flamboyant, less confident than I remembered. It was from Victoria. I didn't open it for 2 days. It sat on the polished granite of my kitchen island, a relic from a past life. I wasn't afraid of what it might contain. I was simply unsure if it deserved my attention. Finally, on a quiet afternoon, I slid a finger under the seal and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. It wasn't a plea for money or a demand for forgiveness. There were no excuses, no justifications, no attempts to shift the blame. It was just a few short, simple sentences. She was sorry. Not just for the money, but for everything. She wrote that she finally understood what she had lost, and that she hoped one day I would find happiness. That was all. I read it once, then folded it and placed it in a drawer with other documents I no longer needed, but didn't have the heart to throw away. I didn't write back. I didn't feel the need to. The words on the page were hers. A step on a long road she would have to walk alone. They no longer had the power to wound me, but they also no longer had the power to heal me, because the wound itself was gone. The anger had been a fire that had burned itself out, leaving behind not ash, but clear, solid ground. Looking out at the vast, glittering tapestry of the city from my window, I finally understood the true nature of legacy. My parents had believed it was something you were given, a name to uphold, an heirloom to be passed down like a crown. They spent their lives polishing the outside of a hollow vessel, terrified of what people might see if they peeked inside. But legacy isn't given, it's built. It's not in your bloodline, it's in the foundations you lay, the structures you create, the bridges you build for others. It's measured not by the applause you receive, but by the quiet, lasting impact of your work. For so many years, they mistook my silence for weakness. They saw an empty room and assumed it was a sign of failure. They never understood that my silence wasn't emptiness. It was the quiet of a workshop. It was the focused, patient, solitary time spent drafting the blueprints, learning the tools, and pouring the foundation for a victory that could not be denied. While they were busy performing on their stage, I was building a skyscraper, brick by invisible brick. And now my life is my own. The quiet is no longer a shield against their noise. It is a space filled with peace, with the hum of my own creations, with the promise of the lives that will be changed by a gift from a grandmother they tried to take from me. A true legacy, my legacy. And it is only just beginning.